I never planned to talk about something this personal, but over the last few weeks, things in my home have shifted in a way that I can't ignore anymore. It started quietly, almost harmlessly, like the kind of thing every parent deals with at some point. My 4-year-old son Aiden announced that he had a new friend. Kids imagine things all the time, so I didn't think much of it. I just smiled, nodded, and went on with my day. But then he told me the name. He said it with this serious look on his face, like he wasn't pretending, like this was someone very real to him. He said, "Mama, this is the tall boy." At first I laughed because the name sounded funny coming from such a small child. But the way he said it made the back of my neck feel cold. The tall boy. He repeated it slowly, like he wanted to make sure I remembered. Then he pointed toward the hallway even though no one else was there. I tried to tell myself it was just imagination, the kind of thing a 4-year-old creates when he's feeling playful or lonely. Kids talk to imaginary friends all the time. They make up characters and worlds. That's normal. Completely normal. But the way Aiden described him, that wasn't normal. He said the tall boy wasn't like the characters in his books or the cartoons he watches. He wasn't silly or colorful. He wasn't magical. He was just tall. Taller than Daddy, taller than the doors, tall enough that he had to bend down to look at Aiden's face. My son told me this while sitting on the floor with his blocks, speaking calmly like he was telling me about something as ordinary as the weather. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he'd seen a shadow somewhere or misunderstood something he overheard. But every day since then, the tall boy kept coming up in our conversations, appearing in places only Aiden seemed to know about. I started asking gentle questions, trying not to encourage him but still wanting to understand. "What does the tall boy look like?" I asked. Aiden shrugged. "He's tall," he said again, like that answered everything. "Does he talk to you?" I asked. My son nodded. "Sometimes." But when I tried to ask what he said, Aiden would get distracted, or suddenly decide he didn't want to talk anymore. It was like he understood more than he could put into words, or maybe he didn't want me to know. The first time I really felt uneasy was a few nights after he first mentioned him. I was in the kitchen finishing the dishes when I heard Aiden chatting softly in the living room. I figured he was talking to his toys or singing to himself, something he does when he's comfortable. But when I peeked around the corner, he wasn't holding anything, wasn't playing. He was standing completely still, looking up toward the corner of the room like he was listening. His eyes weren't following anything. They were fixed, focused, unblinking. I didn't want to scare him, so I kept my voice light when I asked, "Hey buddy, who are you talking to?" He smiled and tapped his finger against his leg, a little habit he has when he's excited. "The tall boy is back," he whispered. I didn't hear anything, didn't feel anything, but the air in the room felt heavy, like it had thickened just a little. I turned on another light, pretending I needed it, but really I just didn't like how dim the room suddenly felt. A few days later, something stranger happened. We were getting ready for bed and Aiden was brushing his teeth. I was sitting on the edge of the tub waiting for him to finish when he suddenly looked past me toward the bathroom doorway. He lifted his hand and waved, smiling in that same quiet way. I turned around so fast I nearly slipped on the mat, but there was no one there. Just the hallway, dim and empty. "Is the tall boy here?" I asked before I could stop myself. Aiden nodded, still waving. I tried to laugh it off, but my stomach felt tight. "Where is he standing?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. My son pointed upward, not at eye level but higher, as if someone much taller than me was standing right in the doorway. Then he said, "He wants to see my room." I don't know why that bothered me so much, but it did. Something about that sentence made my skin crawl. I told Aiden that everyone had to sleep, even imaginary friends, and that the tall boy could wait until morning. My son didn't argue, but he looked confused, almost disappointed, like I was the one who didn't understand how things worked. That night, after he finally fell asleep, I sat in the living room with all the lights on. I kept telling myself this was normal, that kids have imaginary friends for comfort, for fun, for creativity. There was nothing wrong with it. But why did Aiden always look up when he talked about him? Why did he describe the tall boy like he was someone who visited, not someone he made up? And why did I keep feeling like someone was standing just out of view every time Aiden mentioned his name? The turning point came last weekend. We were outside in the yard, letting Aiden play before dinner. It was a calm, cloudy afternoon, and the sky looked like it was thinking about rain. Aiden was drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, humming to himself. I was scrolling on my phone, half watching him, half trying to relax. Then he stopped humming. He dropped the stick, and he looked toward the tree line at the back of our yard. I followed his gaze, expecting to see a dog or maybe a neighbor. But there was nothing. Just trees, still and quiet. Aiden lifted his hand again, that same small wave he'd done before. "He's outside today," he whispered. my chest tightened and I asked, "Who is?" But I already knew the answer. Aiden didn't look away from the trees. The tall boy. He wanted to come from the woods this time. I tried to keep calm, tried to remind myself this was all imagination. But something about the way Aiden was staring felt off, like he wasn't pretending this time. Like he saw something I couldn't. Then he tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide, voice soft. "Mama," he said, "why don't you say hi back? He's waiting for you." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a story Aiden was telling. Something about it felt bigger, heavier, like whatever this imaginary friend was, it wasn't fading away like most childhood stories do. And now I'm left wondering what my son has been seeing. What he's been talking to. And what exactly waits in the places I can't see. Because last night, he told me the tall boy finally wants to talk to me too. And that's where everything truly begins. After that night, I found myself paying attention to the smallest things, shadows, sounds, the way Aiden glanced around the room like he was waiting for someone to appear. I didn't want to let fear cloud my judgment, but it was hard to ignore how different he had become in such a short time. He didn't seem scared though. If anything, he acted like all of this was normal, like having a very tall imaginary friend was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes I wished I could step into his little mind just to understand what he saw. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more it kept pulling at me. I even asked my sister if she'd ever dealt with anything like this with her own kids. She laughed at first, telling me imaginary friends were common and healthy. But when I mentioned the name the tall boy, her smile faded just a little, like something about the way I said it didn't sit right with her. She asked me what he looked like and I told her the same thing Aiden had told me. Tall. Too tall. And no real details beyond that. She didn't say anything after that, but she changed the subject pretty quickly. The next morning I tried to get more information out of Aiden without sounding nervous. We were eating breakfast, sunlight coming through the window, everything warm and peaceful. It felt like the perfect moment to bring it up, like maybe daytime would make it less unsettling. I kept my voice light and asked, "Did you see your friend again last night?" Aiden nodded, kicking his little feet under the table. He was standing by the door. I glanced toward the hallway without meaning to. Did he say anything? Aiden thought for a second, tapping his spoon against his bowl. He said he wanted to talk to you, but you were sleeping. That made my stomach twist. Did he tell you what he wanted? No, he said simply. But he said you're almost ready. Those words stuck with me the rest of the day. Ready for what? Ready for who? And why would an imaginary friend care whether I was ready at all? Later, when Aiden was down for his nap, I decided to look through old photos and videos of him, trying to see if I'd missed anything. Maybe he'd mentioned imaginary friends before. Maybe there had been signs I brushed off. I watched clips from last year where he played with cars, babbled nonsense, danced around the living room. He was carefree, always laughing, always moving. But in the recent videos, the ones from the past few weeks, I noticed a small change. His eyes weren't always focused on what he was playing with. Sometimes he would glance toward the corner, or pause mid-sentence like he was listening to someone else. That made me pause the video. What was he hearing? Or who was he seeing? I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but the truth is I felt completely out of my depth. There's no guidebook on how to handle something like this. Nobody tells you what to do when your child insists someone invisible is in the room. I kept reminding myself not to jump to conclusions, not to let my imagination get carried away. But the things Aiden said weren't the kind of things he picked up from cartoons. They didn't feel silly or playful. They felt specific. That evening, while I was reading him a story before bed, he stopped me halfway through and pointed to the corner of his room. "He's here again," he whispered. I swallowed hard and forced myself to look at the empty space. Nothing. Just shadows from the nightlight. "What is he doing?" I asked. Aiden leaned closer to my ear like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "He's checking my room to make sure it's safe." "Safe from what?" I didn't ask. I didn't want to hear the answer. After he fell asleep, I stayed in the doorway for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his little breaths. I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of whatever had taken such an interest in him. And even though I kept telling myself it was all imaginary, something deep down kept insisting that something real was happening. The next few days passed in small, strange moments. Aiden would stop walking suddenly like someone was blocking his path. He'd giggle at empty chairs. He'd step aside when no one was there, whispering, "Oops, sorry." Once he asked me to set an extra place at the table. When I asked who it was for, he just smiled and said, "You know." One afternoon, while he was playing with his toy train set, I sat down beside him and asked gently, "Aiden, does the tall boy ever leave the house?" He nodded without looking up. "He goes where he wants." Does he go to school with you? He shook his head. No. He said school is too small for him. Then he looked up at me with those wide eyes and said, but he likes our house. He says it feels familiar. That word bothered me. Familiar. How could something imaginary think a place felt familiar? I didn't push further. I didn't want to scare him or make a big deal out of something he clearly didn't see as a problem. But the more he talked, the more I started noticing little things around the house, things I would have ignored before. A door slightly open when I knew I'd closed it. The sound of footsteps upstairs when no one was there. A soft creak at night that didn't match the usual settling noises of the house. I kept rationalizing everything, telling myself houses make sounds and kids imagine things and shadows shift. But deep down, something in me was paying attention. Even my husband, who usually brushes off anything strange, noticed the change. One night he said, "Has Aiden always talked this much to himself?" I didn't tell him the details. I didn't want him to worry unless I had to. But the truth is, Aiden wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to someone. Someone he believed was listening. One evening I finally asked a harder question. Where did you first meet the tall boy? Aiden was coloring at the dining table. He stopped moving his crayon and looked up, his expression unusually serious. He was in my room, he said. He was already there when I woke up. My heart dropped. When was this? Aiden thought for a moment. Before my birthday. Before his birthday. Months before he ever told us. Something cold passed through me. What did he say to you when you first saw him? Aiden smiled, a soft, innocent smile. He said he missed me. I felt the room tilt a little. He missed you. Aiden nodded. He said he used to know me before. A long time ago. Those words stayed with me the rest of the night. I couldn't shake them no matter how hard I tried. Before? A long time ago? What does a 4-year-old understand about a long time ago? Where would he even get an idea like that? When I tucked him into bed that night, he looked up at me and said, "He's happy you're listening now." I froze. Listening to what? To him, Aiden said softly. He said he'll talk to you soon. But not when you're scared. Only when you're ready. I wanted to tell him to stop. I wanted to say I didn't want to hear anything from this imaginary friend. But I didn't want to frighten him. So I just kissed his forehead and whispered good night. As I walked out of the room, the night light behind me flickered for the first time since we bought it. I didn't look back. I just closed the door quietly, knowing that whatever was happening, it wasn't slowing down. And the tall boy was getting closer. The days that followed felt heavier, like the air in the house was slowly thickening. Nothing dramatic happened, but the small things kept adding up, each one nudging at my nerves. I tried to stay calm for Aiden's sake, but every time he looked past me or paused mid-sentence, my stomach tightened. It was like living with a quiet countdown, except I didn't know what it was leading to. One evening, while folding laundry in the living room, I heard Aiden laughing softly in his room. It wasn't unusual for him to laugh by himself, but this time it sounded like he was responding to someone. Pausing between laughs, leaving space like he was in a conversation. I moved quietly down the hallway and stood outside his door. His voice was low, almost whispering. "It's okay. I can show her later," he said, then giggled again. My heart tapped harder against my ribs. I pushed the door open gently. Aiden was sitting on the floor with his stuffed animals in a circle, but he wasn't looking at them. He was looking toward the far side of the room near his closet. "Who are you talking to, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice light even though my hands felt cold. He looked over at me and smiled. "The tall boy," he said cheerfully, like he was talking about a real friend sitting right there. I glanced at the corner, forcing myself to stay steady. "What were you telling him?" Aiden shrugged. "He wanted to show you something, but he said not now." I tried to breathe slowly. "Show me what?" Aiden thought for a moment. He said you'll see it soon. When the house is quiet. The house suddenly felt too quiet, like it understood what he said. That night, after I put him to bed, I sat alone in the living room thinking about everything. About how this imaginary friend didn't act like something a child would make up just for fun. The tall boy wasn't silly or cute. He didn't have funny powers or a strange voice. He wasn't like a character from a cartoon. Instead, he felt like something observing. And more than that, Aiden wasn't just making things up as he went. His descriptions were too consistent, too steady. The same height references. The same calm tone. The same sense of familiarity he kept mentioning. I didn't understand any of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling at the edges of our family, stretching our sense of safety thinner each day. At work, I found myself distracted, staring off into space thinking about shadows. A coworker even asked if everything was okay. I told her I hadn't been sleeping well, which was true. But I didn't tell her why. How do you explain something like this without sounding irrational? My son's imaginary friend feels too real, isn't exactly something people know how to respond to. A subplot started forming in my mind, something I hadn't wanted to consider. What if all of this had something to do with the house? We'd lived here for 3 years and it had always felt cozy. But Aiden had been younger then, too small to talk or describe things. Maybe he'd always been sensitive to something I couldn't see. Maybe he'd noticed things before he could speak them aloud. One afternoon I finally decided to ask him directly. We were sitting in the backyard, the late afternoon sun turning the grass golden. Aiden was drawing in his notebook, colorful lines scattered across the page. I sat beside him, trying not to let my voice reveal how tightly I was holding myself together. "Do you see the tall boy only here?" I asked gently, "or do you see him other places too?" Aiden kept drawing, not even hesitating. "Just here. He says he knows this house better." Something cold ran through me again. "Did he live here before?" I asked softly, trying not to push too hard. My son paused. Then he nodded as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He said he was here a long time. Before us. Before everyone." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't want to encourage him, but I also didn't want to shut him down. The last thing I wanted was for him to feel like he couldn't talk to me. So I just nodded and pretended to understand. Inside the house, I found myself walking more slowly, taking in every room with new eyes. I noticed little things. How the hallway always seemed slightly darker than the rest of the house, how Aiden's bedroom had a strange stillness in certain corners, how the temperature sometimes dipped for no reason. It wasn't dramatic, nothing that would make anyone else gasp, but it was enough to make me question my own senses. One night, after everyone went to bed, I decided to test something. I sat quietly on the couch in the living room, all the lights off except for the lamp beside me. I wanted to see if the silence revealed anything, if there was something I had been too distracted to notice before. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then I felt a slight shift in the room. Not a sound. Not a movement. Just a subtle feeling that the air had changed, like someone had stepped quietly into the space. My eyes drifted toward the hallway even though I didn't want to look. The hallway looked the same. Empty. Quiet. But my body reacted before my mind did. A slow prickling along my arms, the same feeling you get when someone stands behind you even though you haven't heard them. I turned on the TV just to break the silence, even though I wasn't watching anything. I stayed up far too late after that, pretending I was just caught up in a show, but the truth was I didn't want to walk through the dark hallway to my bedroom. The conflict in the house kept growing too. My husband started noticing the changes in Aiden. He asked why our son kept staring at the corners of the room, why he kept leaving space beside him on the couch, why he woke up some nights talking softly to someone. When I finally told him about the tall boy, he tried to laugh it off at first. But the more I explained, the more silent he became. He didn't like the idea of entertaining anything strange, so his solution was simple: ignore it. "Kids make things up," he said. "Don't encourage it." But ignoring it didn't make it stop. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of small footsteps. I thought Aiden was heading to our room, so I slipped out of bed and followed the soft pitter-patter. But when I reached the hallway, I saw him standing at the end of it, facing the living room. Not moving. Not speaking. "What are you doing out of bed?" I whispered, trying not to startle him. Aiden didn't turn around. He just lifted his hand slowly and pointed into the living room. "He's standing over there," he whispered. My body froze, but I forced myself to step forward, staying calm for him. "There's no one," I began. Aiden cut me off, his voice trembling for the first time. "Mama, he's not waving tonight." A quiet chill ran through the house, like the air itself had pulled tight. And for the first time since all of this started, I realized something terrifying. Aiden wasn't scared before. But now he was. And whatever the tall boy wanted, he was almost done waiting. The night Aiden finally showed fear changed something in the house. It was like a quiet line had been crossed, and the air felt different from that point on. I kept trying to tell myself it was all imagination, that stress and lack of sleep were twisting everything into something worse than it was. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just in my mind. Something had shifted in Aiden, and whatever he was seeing, it was becoming more real to him than ever. After that hallway moment, Aiden slept in our room for a few nights. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He just climbed into bed between us and wrapped his little arms around my arm like he was afraid I'd disappear. Every now and then he'd look toward the doorway, not saying anything, but his eyes would track something I couldn't see. Each time he did, I'd reach for his hand and hold it until his breathing slowed. During the days, things felt normal on the surface. Breakfast, cartoons, toys scattered everywhere. But the more normal the days looked, the heavier the nights became. It felt like the house held its breath during sunlight, only exhaling once the sky got dark. A new pattern started forming too. Aiden kept glancing at the window. Not in a playful way. Not in a distracted way. But in a watchful way, like he was waiting for something to appear. I asked him once what he was looking for, but he just said, he likes watching from outside when it's almost night. I stopped asking after that. Meanwhile, a strange tension started building between me and my husband. He tried to stay level-headed, but I could see the worry creeping in. He'd get up at night to check the locks, walk around the house without telling me why, or turn on lights he never used before. He'd brush it off when I asked, claiming he heard a noise or thought the back door wasn't fully shut. But the truth was written all over him. He felt it too. One night, after Aiden fell asleep, we sat at the kitchen table in silence. We weren't fighting, we were just both thinking too loudly. Finally he asked, "Do you really think something's happening? Or are we letting his imagination get to us?" I looked at him and said honestly, "I don't know. But I don't think imagination makes a kid terrified to look down a hallway." Before he could respond, we heard a soft tap from the direction of the living room. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a tap. Like someone lightly knocking on a surface. My husband tensed but didn't move. I whispered, "It's probably the house settling." But I didn't believe it. And he didn't either. The tapping happened again, slightly louder this time. Like someone testing something. He stood up finally and walked toward the living room. I followed slowly, every step stretching out, every sound echoing louder than it should. When we reached the living room, everything looked normal. Nothing out of place. No sign of movement. But the window was fogged near the bottom corner. A small patch like someone had breathed against the glass. Except no one was near it. My husband wiped it with his sleeve. "Condensation," he said quickly, even though neither of us truly believed that. But before we could say anything else, we heard Aiden call out from the bedroom. His voice was shaky. "Mama, he's inside now." We rushed back to him. He was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide, staring at the doorway again. My husband checked the hallway, checked the closets, checked every room with attention I'd never seen in him before. But Aiden didn't look at him. He kept looking past me toward something I couldn't see. "He walked through the window," Aiden whispered. "He doesn't like being outside anymore." After that night, things spiraled even faster. Aiden began waking up at the exact same time every night, 3:14. Not 3:13. Not 3:15. Always 3:14. He'd sit up suddenly, like someone had whispered his name right beside his ear. When I asked him why he woke up, he'd just say, "He wanted me to." One early morning, I caught him standing in the middle of the living room, barefoot, eyes half open. Sleepwalking, I thought at first. But he wasn't moving randomly. He was standing with his hands clasped in front of him, staring straight ahead with a blank expression. I whispered his name, trying not to startle him. He turned his head just slightly toward me, not fully, just enough so I could see his eyes, and said, "He's almost ready too." The words made something inside me freeze. "Who's ready?" Aiden blinked slowly. "You." I didn't question him then. I just carried him back to bed, holding him so tightly he squirmed. By the time morning came, I was exhausted but too afraid to fall asleep. During all this, another subplot started forming in my mind, one that scared me even more. What if the tall boy wasn't just connected to the house? What if he was connected to us? Something about the way Aiden kept saying familiar, or already knew me, or he's been waiting, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. My husband suggested taking Aiden to a doctor, just to rule out anything serious. I agreed at first, but then I realized something strange. Aiden never mentioned the tall boy outside the house. Not once. At the grocery store, at the park, in the car. Nothing. No glancing at corners, no whispering, no hidden giggles. It was like the presence didn't follow him once he stepped outside. Which meant it wasn't inside Aiden's imagination. It was inside our home. One night, while trying to fall asleep, I heard soft footsteps again. I thought it was Aiden, so I got up right away and followed the sound down the hall. But when I reached his room, he was asleep, breathing softly, completely still. The footsteps continued behind me. Slow. Steady. Like someone tall taking long strides. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The next morning, I told my husband everything. The footsteps, the window, the fog, Aiden waking at the same time. He didn't laugh this time. He didn't brush it off. Something had shifted in him too. He said he felt watched at night, like something stood in the corner of our bedroom while we slept. We both knew something was building to a breaking point. And whether we understood it or not, the tall boy wasn't going away. He was getting closer. More present. More focused. And then came the night Aiden walked into the living room holding something in his hand. Something I'd never seen him draw before. A picture. A picture of a tall, thin figure standing behind a smaller figure. One that looked like me. I asked him softly, "What is this?" Aiden looked up with calm eyes, the same kind he used when talking about things he didn't completely understand but had accepted anyway. He said, "It's almost time," he whispered. "He wants you to see him properly." My hands shook as I held the drawing. Not because of what was on the paper, but because the tall figure in the picture had no face. Yet somehow, I felt like it was watching me. And that's when I realized the climax wasn't far away. The tall boy was no longer waiting. He was preparing. The silence after that moment felt heavier than anything before, as if the air itself had started paying attention. Nothing moved around them, yet both sensed that something unseen had shifted. The path ahead didn't feel the same anymore, and even the smallest sound, leaves brushing against one another, a distant thud, a soft echo, suddenly felt like a warning. But before either of them could speak, the light they had seen earlier flickered again, only this time it moved. It didn't drift the way a lantern would. It darted, quick, sharp, almost purposeful, like it was reacting to their presence. They froze. The glow hesitated for a second, then split into two separate sparks, drifting in opposite directions as though testing them. It wasn't just strange. It felt intentional. They exchanged a look, both realizing at the same time that they weren't dealing with something random. Something out here knew they were close, maybe too close, to finding what they weren't meant to see. The forest suddenly felt smaller, the shadows tighter around them, as if squeezing them deeper into the unknown. Even the familiar landmarks weren't reliable anymore. The trail that was clear hours ago now looked different, and neither could shake the feeling that something had rearranged itself when they weren't looking. Just when they tried to regroup and decide which way to go, the silence broke with a soft mechanical hum, low, steady, not natural to the environment. It came from beneath the ground like something hidden was powering up. The vibration traveled through their shoes and up their legs, making their hearts race faster. Whatever was buried out here was no rumor. It was real, active, and waking up. Before they could take a step back, a cold gust of wind swept through the trees. But this wind didn't feel like weather. It felt directed, almost like a warning or a push. The branches swayed, shapes shifting above them, casting stretched silhouettes that made everything feel unstable. At that moment, they noticed something they had missed before. The trees around them were marked. Not carved by hand, not scratched by animals. Marked by something precise, patterned, repeated. A code. A message. Or maybe a path meant to guide someone, but definitely not them. The tension grew when they noticed a pair of footprints near the marks. Fresh ones. The dirt hadn't even had time to settle. Someone else had been here moments before, walking faster, cutting through the brush without hesitation. Whoever it was seemed to know exactly where they were going, and that was more unsettling than anything else. Because it meant someone was ahead of them, someone who already understood the secret they were just now piecing together. A sudden snap echoed through the trees behind them, not loud but sharp enough to make their stomachs drop. They turned at the same time, expecting to see someone step forward, but there was nothing. Just shadows shifting, the kind that trick the eye into seeing movement even when nothing's there. But the snap wasn't an illusion. Something had stepped on that branch. Something close. The light ahead blinked again, but this time, it didn't feel like a guide. It felt like bait. The humming under the ground grew stronger, vibrating through the soil like a slow heartbeat. The forest seemed to be pulsing with it, almost syncing its movements to the rhythm. They took one cautious step back, but before they could take another, the ground behind them gave a short, dull thump, like a heavy door being shut from below. The stakes were higher now. Whatever was hidden out here wasn't just reacting to them, it was adapting, changing, preparing. They realized they were no longer searching for the truth. The truth was already aware of them. And then, just as they began to move forward again, a figure appeared between the trees. Not close but not far enough to ignore. Standing still, almost blending with the darkness. Its outline was human, but the posture was wrong, too still, too controlled. It didn't approach. It only watched. It was the second twist they never expected. They weren't alone in the search, and the person watching them didn't look like someone who wanted to be found. The air tightened once more as they stood frozen, not sure whether to run, hide, or confront. The figure didn't speak. It didn't react. It only lifted its hand slowly, pointing toward the deeper part of the forest. Not threatening, more like a command. The light in the distance went dark at the exact same moment. Everything was leading them there, deeper into the uncertainty, towards something no longer avoidable. The conflict was no longer just about uncovering a secret. It was about surviving what waited on the other side of it. And as the wind circled around them again, colder than before, they understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever they were walking into next was where the real danger began. The moment the figure pointed toward the deeper part of the forest, something inside them shifted from fear to acceptance. They didn't know who, or what, was guiding them, but turning back wasn't an option anymore. Every sign, every strange light, every vibration beneath their feet had been pushing them toward the same direction. So they stepped forward, keeping their eyes on the narrow space between the trees where the figure had stood. But when they glanced back, the figure was gone, leaving behind only a faint, cold imprint in the air. As they moved deeper, the humming underground grew louder, steady like a generator that had been waiting for a signal. The earth vibrated with each step, and the trees around them looked twisted, as if shaped by something that didn't belong to the natural world. The markings on the trunks became clearer now, forming patterns that connected from tree to tree like a web, a trail disguised as nature. And at the end of that trail, the faint glow they had been following reappeared, but this time it wasn't flickering. It burned steady, bright, and strong. When they reached the clearing, everything snapped into place. The source of the lights was built into the ground, a circular structure half buried beneath roots and dirt, pulsating with energy. It didn't look ancient or abandoned. It looked active, maintained, hidden deliberately. And standing beside it was the same figure, now fully visible under the glow. The figure wasn't mysterious anymore. It was human. Tired, wary, and carrying the kind of weight that only comes from knowing too much. He lowered the hood slowly, revealing a face that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years. He didn't step forward. He simply said in a strained voice, "You weren't supposed to get this far. But since you did, you need to know the truth before this place chooses for you." The truth came in fragments, but each one answered what they had feared. The humming underground wasn't nature. It was a hidden system, something designed to monitor movements in the area, something that had been running without anyone's knowledge. The lights weren't paranormal, they were signals, warnings, and sometimes traps. And the symbols carved into the trees weren't random. They marked boundaries, instructions, and in some areas, blind spots. But the biggest revelation was the figure himself. He wasn't guarding the place. He was trapped by it, bound to it because he had uncovered too much years ago. The forest didn't let people leave once they reached the deeper levels of its secret. It watched. It listened. And it adapted. They felt a chill run through them as he explained that the moment they followed the lights, their fate had been set in motion. The system underground had identified them as a threat, or maybe as a replacement. And now the only way to shut it down was to disturb the central circle, the glowing core at the center of the clearing. But shutting it down came with a price. Someone had to stay behind to absorb the final surge of energy. Someone had to take the place of the watcher. The two of them looked at each other, understanding what he was suggesting. It wasn't a choice anyone should have to make, but they couldn't walk away now. Too much had been uncovered, too much danger had been unleashed. If they left it running, the forest would continue choosing new targets, new victims, new watchers. They stepped toward the core together, their hearts racing, every instinct telling them to run. But when they touched the edge of the glowing circle, something unexpected happened. The humming stopped. Even the wind froze. And the light collapsed inward with one sudden pull. There was no explosion. No blinding flash. Just silence. The forest around them shifted, almost relaxing as though a tension had been released. The figure who had warned them staggered back, finally free from whatever held him. For a breathless moment, everything felt resolved, complete. They had shut it down. They had ended the pattern. The danger was over. But then one of them noticed the ground beneath their feet. The soil wasn't settling. It was moving, slow, subtle, like something breathing. The glow that had disappeared moments earlier returned, but now it was beneath them, not around them. The system hadn't shut down. It had transferred. The final twist came when they realized the truth. The forest didn't need a watcher anymore. It had chosen something else. It had chosen them. The light beneath the soil pulsed once, like a heartbeat syncing with their own, and the air around them thickened as the figure who had been freed watched in horror. He whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud, "It didn't release you. It replaced itself with you." And as the last of the glow faded, leaving the clearing dark and strangely calm, they felt the weight settle in their chest. A connection they hadn't asked for but now couldn't break. The conflict had ended, but the cost was a new beginning they never expected. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. And somewhere beneath the ground, the hum started up once more. Only this time it matched their heartbeat. For a long moment, they stayed perfectly still, listening to the faint hum rising through the soil. It wasn't loud anymore, not threatening or sharp the way it had been earlier. It felt more like an echo, a leftover vibration trying to figure out what to do now that everything had changed. They took a slow breath and stepped back from the clearing, trying to understand what the forest wanted from them now. Nothing grabbed them. Nothing pulled them under. The ground stayed steady. And for the first time since this whole thing began, they realized the forest wasn't trying to trap them anymore. It was adjusting to them, not the other way around. The man who had been trapped for years, thin, pale, and exhausted, watched all of this with a trembling kind of relief. It was the first time he looked like someone who belonged in the real world, not a ghost hiding between trees. He took a few careful steps forward like someone learning to walk again. When he reached them, he didn't say anything right away. He just looked at them, studying their face to see if they were still themselves. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "You broke the cycle. You didn't become what I did. The forest, it adjusted to you differently. You're not trapped." He looked down at the glow fading back into the ground. "But it's connected to you now. It listens to you." The weight of those words settled on them slowly, not as fear but as responsibility. The humming didn't feel threatening now because it was responding to their emotions. Calm, steady, curious. All the panic from before had stopped because the forest no longer saw them as a danger. It saw them as its anchor. Not a prisoner. Not a watcher. Something new. They didn't say anything for a while. They just let the silence sit between them, letting the forest breathe around them. The man lifted his face toward the trees, inhaling air he probably hadn't tasted in years. Then he looked at them again, a little hopeful, a little lost. "What happens now?" he asked. They didn't know. But they did know one thing: they weren't leaving him behind. Whatever this connection was, whatever the forest expected, it didn't change the fact that they were human first. And humans didn't abandon someone who had suffered alone for so long. They told him they would help him get out of the forest. Even if the place had changed its relationship with them, they didn't want to stay longer than necessary. The man nodded, still unsure whether escape was real but willing to try. So together they started walking back the way they came. The forest felt different now. The trees seemed to shift aside, giving them room. The path that had seemed endless and confusing earlier now opened clearly, like the woods were guiding them out instead of keeping them in. The humming followed them quietly the whole way, softer than before, almost like a distant reminder that the connection was still alive. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, the man stopped in disbelief. Sunlight stretched over the ground in wide, warm patches, something he hadn't seen properly in years. His eyes filled instantly, and he stepped into the light as though afraid it would vanish. It didn't. It touched him gently, warming his skin, proving that he was free. For the first time he smiled. A real smile. "I thought this place owned me forever," he said quietly. "I thought I'd disappear here." They wanted to reassure him, to explain that the forest wasn't evil, just misunderstood and reactive. But they didn't have the right words yet. Instead, they placed a hand on his shoulder and walked with him toward the road. The forest stayed behind them, quiet and still, respecting the distance. When they reached their car, the man hesitated before getting in. "It's strange," he admitted. "I feel like part of me is still there." They understood more than they wanted to. The connection hummed faintly under their ribs, not painful, just present. But they told him the truth, that he didn't owe the forest anything anymore. Whatever connection it had with them didn't involve him. He had been released completely. He nodded slowly and finally climbed into the seat. The car felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. Doors closing. Engine starting. The world outside was calm, ordinary, unaffected. Nobody would ever guess what lay hidden just past the tree line. As they drove him to town, he told his story in pieces. How he had stumbled into the clearing years ago, how he had triggered the system unknowingly, and how the forest had held on to him because it didn't know what else to do. It wasn't cruelty, he said. It was confusion. The system had been running long before either of them had been born, and nobody had ever shut it down, or guided it properly. They listened quietly, each detail confirming what they had already felt. The forest wasn't haunted. It wasn't alive in a dangerous way. It was just a system built to respond to energy, intention, and intrusion. Over time, it had blurred the line between nature and something more complicated. When they dropped the man off near a small outpost, he paused before stepping out. "You broke something," he said softly. "But you also healed something. Maybe that's why it chose you differently." They didn't have an answer. They only nodded. He gave one last grateful look, then walked toward the building where Real help waited. The moment he was inside, they felt the connection shift, not weaken, just settle. Driving home alone felt surreal. The road was quiet, the sky darkening into evening. But the forest's hum stayed with them, softer now, almost peaceful. It wasn't calling them back. It wasn't demanding anything. It simply existed inside them like a memory or a quiet agreement. That night, as they finally rested, one final realization settled deep in their thoughts. The forest wasn't a threat anymore. It had found someone who could understand it, someone who wouldn't misuse it or fear it blindly. And because of that, everything had changed. There would be no more disappearing hikers. No more strange lights pulling people into danger. No more watchers trapped for years. The system no longer acted on confusion or old programming. It responded to them, and they responded with clarity, calm, and human intention. The conflict had ended in an unexpected way, not through shutting anything down, but by transforming the connection itself. They had become the stabilizer the forest had always needed. As they closed their eyes, the last vibration of the forest settled into a gentle stillness, like a promise that the cycle was truly over. And in that silence, they finally felt something they hadn't since the beginning: peace.